Welcome everyone to Mubadala Pavilion, and thanks for joining this session. My name is Isabel Griñón, and I'm Vice President in the Responsible Investing team at Mubadala. So the objective of this session is to reinforce the idea that financial institutions have a unique opportunity to help address climate change challenges. And for that, we would like to share with you a project that we have developed in Mubadala to support portfolio companies in their decarbonization journey. So as you may know, UAE has committed to achieve net zero by 2050. Mubadala has committed to achieve net zero by 2050 as well. And that implies our portfolio companies to achieve the same target by 2050. So that is why our proactive approach, our proactive support in the decarbonization journey of our portfolio companies is key. So on the one hand, this is important to help our portfolio companies on this decarbonization journey. And on the other hand, it's important to accelerate Mubadala's climate agenda. So the support we are providing our portfolio companies is divided in two main phases. One is the assessment phase, and the second one is the implementation phase. On the assessment phase, what we are doing is to calculate the carbon footprint of our portfolio companies, and that implies calculating the Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. The second element within the assessment phase is conducting energy audits in order to identify energy efficiency measures. And then the third element within the assessment phase is the identification or the definition of decarbonization pathways for each portfolio company to align with the net zero target by 2050. So we started this process earlier this year, and we involve some of our UAE-based portfolio companies. So we started with 16 companies in our portfolio, and we are planning to expand the scope of this exercise to other companies within our portfolio. So with this background, let me introduce the key stakeholders that have driven this process. We have Noura Al-Hamadi, who is Head of Partnerships and Innovation at Solutions Plus. Solutions Plus is a shared services company which has led the engagement with all the stakeholders in this process and has made this project successful. Then we have Philippe Color, who is Senior Vice President in the UAE Investment Platform at Mubadala, and he is the asset manager of some of the 16 companies that are part of this exercise. And then later we have another Philip Rosenthal, who is Associate Director on Environment and Sustainability at WSP. WSP is the consultancy company that has done all the studies required in the assessment phase. So with that, let's start the discussion. Noura, I would like to ask you, what was your approach to take this project from the strategic level, and how did you put it into concrete steps?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Isabel. Our role as a shared services entity is very vital for Mubadala as we manage their day-to-day operation and back office. So we were in a strategic position to be able to lead this initiative and to be able to support the Mubadala Group portfolio assets. We have engaged with WSP, who supported us with leading this initiative with a strong local presence and a strong engineering background to be able to identify and measure the carbon footprint and identify the decarbonization pathway. In addition, we have helped Mubadala and the assets, since we are a shared services company and we have the volumes and we have the economies of scale to identify the synergies between all of these assets to be able to deliver and support the assets with their decarbonization journey.
That's great, Noura. I think I'm sure that this is the right approach in terms of gaining efficiency and also in terms of the quality that this exercise requires. So, Philip from WSP, I would love to hear your opinion on how was this project unique in its way to position Mubadala as the only sovereign wealth fund in the region to have this level of transparency of its portfolio.
Thank you, and thank you for having us here. Maybe it's a good idea first to take a step back. We have measured scopes 1, 2, and 3, and just for everybody's benefit, Scope 1 are the emissions that are originating from burning fossil fuels directly on site. Scope 2 are emissions that are resulting from emissions where it has been burned somewhere else, but it is actually a result of your consumption, electricity. And Scope 3 are the emissions from your value chain, up and downstream. Now, this is important to understand first. Then the second thing that is maybe also important to understand is that financial institutions generally start with industry averages. They take the amount of money that has been invested in a certain sector through a certain investment vehicle in order to understand the carbon intensity of across the portfolio. Now, if you have that, the next step would be to go into primary data. Mubadala has actually gone through the exercise that Isabel has just mentioned, has done both steps. It has done a maturity assessment, understanding where's carbon intensive companies, what is the amount of data availability there, and then it has helped us as a service provider to help build cohorts of companies and run those through an orderly process. That has helped to actually allow for primary data-based, asset-specific decarbonization pathways. And this then gets aggregated back to Mubadala. And I think this approach is incredibly powerful because it gives us scale and speed. And these are two things that we really, really desperately need in this space. So yes, it's a very important process, and it's a very important project to showcase because we think that this level of data accuracy is commendable. And we hope that is becoming an example for others to follow.
Thanks, Philip. Yeah, that is really important. It's essential to go into this kind of detail to make real our pathway towards 2050. Thanks, Philip. So now I would like to pivot to Philip from Mubadala. Philip, how does this project help you increase the value of your assets, and how is Mubadala addressing decarbonization as an investment company and specifically in the real estate portfolio?
Thank you, Isabel. Maybe if I can turn the question around and first answer how Mubadala addresses decarb and how important it is to us. Responsible investment has always been part of the DNA of the company. It's crucial and central to our investment approach. And being a sovereign investor, Mubadala has the ability to invest in the long term. And we are eager to invest with like-minded investors, partners, who share our values. And one of those core values is finding tangible ways to make a substantial change. And there's quite a few examples in our company where we've managed to achieve that. The biggest one would, of course, be Masdar, where we invested over $30 billion in order to create one of the leading renewable energy companies in the world. But there's many other examples. Now we have the net zero target for the country. We have the net zero target for Mubadala. Project Decarb, but a decarbonization project for us is one of the early but very, very crucial steps for our assets. Our 16 assets, which were mapped to the nth degree, to understand every single emission we have, and the outcome from the report from Philip and his team showed us lots of opportunities where we can create value. Every CO2 emission reduction has a cost, of course, or most of them have a cost. Some are big, some are small, but the cost also comes with a reduction in energy, and that's a EBITDA preservation feature, or even an EBITDA improvement feature, and capitalizing that improved EBITDA gives us a stronger value. So from that perspective, every investment, or whether small or big, had an ROI. And some ROIs are very efficient, 0 to 3 years, even very simple things, which I think Noura will talk about a bit later. And others have a 10-year plus horizon for the ROI. Of course, from a commercial side, it's difficult to argue that 10, 15, 20 years ROI makes sense. but we're also looking at it from the perspective of readying the asset for the next phase of ownership. In today's world, and maybe more so in other parts than in certain parts of the world, there is certain investors, institutional or fund investors, will not invest in your asset if it's not adhering to a certain CO2 emission standard or energy efficiency rating. And you, by not rating your asset for this next ownership phase, you are either reducing your buyer pool, or you're excluding people from your buyer pool, or your buyer pool will price in the fact that you haven't executed those changes. So from that perspective, it's the RI almost becomes secondary, because if there's no buyer market afterwards, there's you've lost the RI. And sorry, one last point, if I may. Given that many of those assets we looked at were real estate heavy assets, one important thing we need to consider is that 70% of the buildings that will be there in 2050, there's different stats about this, but the one I read is 70% of the buildings in 2050 stand already today. So we need to focus on one hand on the 30% that are not built yet, to try to create net zero or even carbon efficient buildings. And we actually at Masdar City developing 3 of those net zero efficiency buildings. And on the 70%, all we can do is make them as efficient as possible. Retrofitting an existing building to net zero is very, very difficult. Technology will help us in the future, but today there's only so much we can do, and there is a case that we will have to, and everyone will have to offset the remaining emissions at the end.
Thank you, Philip. I hope that this inspires other asset managers that may be in the audience today, in the sense of how we, the responsible investing team, partner with the asset managers within Mubadala, as we add or we aim to add value to our portfolio companies through the decarbonization process. So now moving to Noura again, can you please explain what were the challenges during contracting and executing the project?
Sure. I believe there were 3 main challenges during the procurement process and during the execution process. During the procurement process, the main challenge was we have seen a lot of bidders and a lot of suppliers that have came and showcased their proposals, but we have found a lack of local bidders with the experience that we want to do in delivering the decarbonization project. We had found not a lot of suppliers had the same history of projects within the region. Internationally, maybe yes, but within the region, because it's a different aspect, we didn't find that. So that's why the reason we mitigated that risk by identifying and collaborating with a engineering consultancy firm that will depend on the science. The second challenge was, it was a mega project with 16 assets. Managing the stakeholders of 16 assets, different departments, you have to have access to HR, procurement, finance, facility management, to the leadership. So the open dialogue and open communication that we had and the commitment that we saw from the assets and the asset managers was the key aspect that helped us overcome that challenge. And the final challenge was the accessibility of data. So a normal person would think that data would be available anywhere, but the data that were required for the carbon emission calculation is not forthcoming. That's why we had to really work with the assets, with WSP, to be able to identify what type of data and how to get it. We helped the assets get the data to be able to get a very strong reports back and a reliable data for Mubadala and the group companies.
Thank you, Noura. Philip, Noura just mentioned that data collection was more difficult than initially anticipated. What were specific challenges with collecting data for each Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3?
So Scope 1 emissions very, very limited. Apart from the industrial assets, we barely had any Scope 1 emissions in the portfolio. Scope 2 emissions are available, of course, but it was challenging to collate those. And from an asset management perspective, what we can do is push the portfolio companies to look for the data, but they themselves are not versed to source these. It's really not. It's not their day-to-day, and we really realized that it's an early-stage project. We want to do this again and again on a periodic basis, So it was tough the first time around. Next time will surely be a lot more challenging. And for Scope 3, very challenging to get, given that it's not only us who source it. It also we depend on suppliers, on clients, on the entire vertical value chain, and hence it was a challenge. But we made strong estimates.
Can I
Thank
add
you.
to what Philip said? So, lessons learned from round 1 and the first cycle, we have applied that as well to round 2. So it becomes easier every round and every cycle when we deal with more and more assets. So we're applying the lessons learned from the previous initiatives to be able to make it easier for the assets and the asset managers.
That's great. So just a clarification on that, we started with 8 assets earlier this year, around January, and we expanded the scope of this exercise to an additional 8 assets, and that totals 16. So yeah, we have been implementing all the lessons learned from round 1 to round 2, and yeah, the process is becoming more efficient as we work. So Philip, continuing with the challenges, what are the key challenges for sovereign wealth funds in transitioning their portfolios towards low carbon investments?
Yeah, basically I would second what Philip and Noura said, is collecting the data is a key challenge. Getting this data and getting the data in the right kind of quality is key. It's what the quality in the end drives and whether the strategies will actually be implementable. So having this data is instrumental. But it's also, as mentioned, it's been a challenge to get the data at times. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer, and every asset, especially when they come from different sectors, they have different sets of questions. So it actually helped, and I want to emphasize this, the maturity analysis that was done by Mubadala at the beginning to cluster the assets into high data availability and high carbon intensity, that has helped us actually delivering it afterwards. So that's a key aspect that cannot be undervalued. The other thing that is a key challenge is going to be the embedding of processes to follow up on this data on an annual basis. Because now Mubadala has the benefit of having primary data-based carbon footprints for the assets. Now, in order to show progress, you have to measure again next year. And you have to take, as we heard many times here, we have to take stock. And that's the step that Mubadala is ahead, because most of the others, they still have it based on industry averages. They still need to go the step of getting primary data. So there's a little bit of an advantage there. Yeah.
Thank you, Philip. Yeah, this is obviously not an easy process, but yeah, that is why, or that is the reason why sovereign wealth funds and financial institutions in general should start this journey as soon as possible, because it takes time. So, Noura, in your view, what is the positive impact this project has had on Solutions Plus and on the companies that were part of this project?
Yeah, I would summarize that into 4 key areas. The first one is the impact of us gaining access to expertise, gaining access to experience resources, implementation partner to help us with the next phase of this project. That was one key impact that we have felt. The second area is providing and supporting Mubadala with reliable information and reliable data so they can continue to work on that with the assets. That's a key aspect. The third one is, and I think that's one of the key achievements as well, moving the group companies from estimated emissions to measured emissions. That is a first step toward the decarbonization pathway and decarbonization journey, to give them an understanding what do they need to do to be able to tackle that. And finally, it was an awareness and educational experience to everyone, from Solution Plus to Mubadala to the whole asset. Provide awareness on climate action and what are the levers and targets that they have to focus on to be able to reduce their emissions in the future.
And how can you leverage the results of this project for further driving the Mubadala portfolio decarbonization efforts?
Yeah. So we can leverage the lessons learned and the results for the next phase of assets. That's number one. Number two, we're working on the next phase, which is the implementation. This is just the start of a journey. It's just assessing the carbon emission, identifying where the carbon CO2 is focused. But the next phase is implementing these energy efficiencies. And as Solutions Plus, as a shared services company with a tower focused on facility management, we're equipped enough and to be able to support the assets with the economies of scales to be able to implement these efficiency energy measures. That's number one. Number two is the outcomes of Project Decarb helped us to think differently, design differently, and even build differently. That's why we are looking into new technology and innovative technology to be able to share it with our assets and with our clients. And we have been exploring new technologies, and we are showcasing one of the technology that we have explored, which is the solar PV panels that is 100% customizable on the building facade. And please feel free to visit our booth and you can see the panel. It's a glass panel, new technology. It's very interesting to see that. And that's just one technology that we are exploring. And there are other new innovative technology that we're focusing on. So I think there's a lot of impact that we can see, and the benefit of this project is not only for today, this is also for the future.
Thank you, Noura. So as you can see, this project is really genuine on the way we support our portfolio companies as we look to guide them and advise them on how to address climate change and how to adapt to new regulatory frameworks. And this is something that we are willing to expand with other portfolio companies. So moving to Philip, could you emphasize the energy performance of Mubadala's assets and how well they are currently performing in this regard?
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a very good question, actually. The assets that we have assessed, generally speaking, we can say that the energy performance is really good compared to their regional peers. This is due to the fact that there's a very strong emphasis on transversal technologies, like HVAC, for example, or lighting, or building management systems. This allows for generally a very good performance of the assets. Now, this very positive message obviously comes then with a little bit of a drawback, because it becomes harder to find more energy efficiency potential. But still, we were able to identify for the short term another 6%, and up to 2030, another 13% of energy efficiency potential, that then, based on our energy audits, it can be put in a structured manner, it can be budgeted, and then can be actually implemented, because it will not come as a surprise.
Thank you, Philip. I guess that the message here is that, there is always room for improvement, no matter what the current performance of the assets is. Noura, we have been talking about the challenges of this process, the positive impact this project will have, but can you please give us some tangible examples of the measures that have been identified throughout this process and can be implemented to reduce carbon emissions?
Sure. So when we did the exercise, we have done energy audit for more than 100 plus buildings. We have identified 100 plus energy efficiency measures. And these efficiency measures varies from something so simple like changing your LED, your light bulbs with LED, more efficient lighting, to having full-fledged solar PV panel in your parking area to power your building. So, and it's not only the technical aspects, there are also a behavioral aspect. It starts from an individual level and also from a corporate level. Just the awareness that we have done throughout the project helped people understand what they have to do from a behavioral perspective. And finally, as well, we have identified a huge carbon emission from scope 3, which is everything related to supply chain, business travel, employee commuting, water consumption, and others. So that's why we have decided to focus on that and also identify different areas to be able to reduce the carbon emission in the scope 3, which can reach to 70 to 90% of the total overall emissions. So these are just some examples of the things that we have identified throughout the journey.
If I may add one point, I think what I realized was very crucial is at the very beginning is to have a strong engineering team in the asset, especially in real estate assets, of course, because there's a building management system these days. They're very sophisticated. They can do lots of things. They can regulate temperatures, but if the person controlling it doesn't know how to control it, it's a lost opportunity. And that I realized more throughout this project, that really experienced team who knows how to run the building is absolutely crucial. The other efficiencies will not help if there's no strong team there.
I completely second that. It's still the human aspect that we should not forget. The training, upskilling, and answering of the questions that arise throughout the process, I think is incredibly important. We have seen it in many places that this is one of the biggest contributors to the success of a project.
Thank you. I would like to make a remark on what Nora said earlier. So out of these 110 energy efficiency measures that we have identified, we have seen that some of those are financially viable. So that means that companies should be able to implement those immediately. And as they will bring financial returns together with carbon reduction emissions. So it's a matter of starting doing this process and implementing as soon as possible these financially viable measures. So moving to another topic, Philip, could you please let us know how important is stakeholder engagement at the different stages of the decarbonization journey?
Well, you know, stakeholder engagement for me is almost the same topic. It really connects everything. As Philip just mentioned, we need people that are knowledgeable, actually operating the systems, and I believe that technology has a strong angle to play in our global struggle for decarbonization, but stakeholder engagement, sitting down with the people, explaining what the data is needed for, what we need to cover with the data, helping them to understand. This is a partnership approach that was it was very important for us and lived by Mubadala and Solutions Plus, and it has made our work a lot easier, both in the fostering of the partnerships across the asset companies, but also across forming partnerships. Now, when we go into the scope 3, as you mentioned, Nora, we have to look into the supply chain. So then we leave the borders of Mubadala and we start talking to other stakeholders. And there you need to foster the relationships, the partnerships. So stakeholder engagement is, if not one of the most, probably the most important thing that you can do in such a project. With a multi-stakeholder, it's very complicated, yeah. You need that.
Thank you. Yeah, that is one of the most challenges that we have had this year, like making sure that all the stakeholders were interrelated, well connected. Yeah, that there was a fluid conversation, fluency of data sharing. This has been one of the most challenges. A question for Nora: how this project helped the assets for the decarbonization journey?
I think we have heard from Philip as an asset manager how it helped them, how it made them aware of where their CO2 emissions are, where are focused, which area they should focus on, which area they should invest in, and that helped them identify the roadmap to net zero. So when we worked with the assets, we worked collaboratively with them. The roadmap, yes, it was developed with the WSP, but collaboratively with the open dialogue with the assets, we were sharing knowledge, sharing expertise. What should we do first? What should we do second? It's all a collaborative approach. You can't do that on your own. You have always to discuss that and talk with the assets. So I think it opened their eyes on where the focus areas and where the investment areas, and hopefully it will help them throughout the decarbonization and the net zero journey.
Thank you. And looking into the future, Philip from WSP, what role does technological innovation play in a sovereign wealth fund strategy for portfolio decarbonization?
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, there's always room for technological innovation, and we will need innovation. Most of the technologies that we need to decarbonize are already around. So the question is to apply them to a specific circumstance, a specific asset. And that's where our engineering background comes in, and we can help and actually making sense of that. And then building, you have all seen those curves, those decarbonization curves. Basically what we do is we provide the foundation that is under the curve, meaning what are you have to do in which year. And that in energy efficiency. So we will need technological innovation in energy efficiency, but also we will need to deploy the technologies that are already available. Renewable energies, but more, and this is what Nura said, the engagement with the supply chain, generally 80 to 90% are always coming from the scope 3 emissions, from the supply chain. So how can we engage with the supply chain in a more efficient manner to foster and build relationships and partnerships? That's a key message and a key innovation that we need. And the last part is how to gather the data on an annual basis in a credible format. That's another key innovation that needs to be applied. The whole thing is, it gives us two things, as I mentioned in the beginning. We have scale and speed, because we could do 8 companies a batch. Usually it takes us, as a service provider, 3 months to do 1 company. Because of the great foundational work that was done by Mubadala and Solutions Plus, we were able to do 8 with marginal extra amounts of like engineers. So if you think and you look at the challenges that we have globally, and to answer what is on the slide in the back, this is one of the most exciting things that I've worked on in 15 years. So yeah, it's one thing that we are very proud of to be having been a part of, and we hope to continue this great journey and to provide more scale and speed, because that's what the world really needs at the moment.
Thank you, Philip. So we are coming to the end of this discussion. Would you have any final remarks?
Sure.
Nura,
I would like to thank you, Isabel, for having us today here. And just a final comment. It's a collaborative approach. We always have to have the open dialogue, continuous communication with the assets. And to be honest, without the drive, and Philip mentioned it, it's in the DNA of Mubadala. Without the drive of the leadership of Mubadala, without the commitment of the assets and the asset managers, this journey wouldn't have been achieved. So thank you very much for everyone.
I have one last sentence. 2 of our assets, 2 hotels, they have 800 staff, plus minus, and the director of HR of one of the hotels told me, nobody knows what decarbonization is. And she says that's not an issue, it doesn't matter, because they teach themselves, do the right thing, and I think that goes exactly back to the DNA point. It's not about understanding the principles, as obviously the person running the BMS, the person who does the report, they need to understand, but the rest of the team just do what's right. And eventually, if you do this year over year with those assessments, it does become part of what we do, of our DNA.
Yeah, this is exactly right. I think this is what we see as well. If you start at the portfolio level and you go down to the asset and then into the supply chain, the ripple effects that you can have and the transformative power that you can generate is very exciting. And yeah, we would also like to thank Mubadala and Solutions Plus for the opportunity to be part of this. And Isabel, very big thank you to you to have us here today.
Thank you. So thanks everyone for attending this session. Thanks a lot to the panelists for this insightful discussion. I hope it's clear now what is the role, or what could be the role of financial institutions in the decarbonization of their portfolios. We have seen that it's compatible, like the reduction of carbon emissions with continuing getting financial returns. So we encourage other peers to jump in on this journey to have a more global impact. Thank you.
Thank you very much.